Bob, A, B, Bo, Boo, 6 cents saved. She sells seashells by the seashore.
Okay.
Happy?
Yep.
Okay.
Jack is always nice.
You can see monitor.
Good morning. Two news stories off the top this morning. First, we'll be going to Victoria to interview former NDP Attorney General Alec MacDonald on the Vogel affair, which will not go away and which the opposition is still attacking quite fiercely. And after that, we'll be talking to Jerry Spitz of the Fisheries Association and George Hewison of the Fishermen's Union. What the devil has happened to the herring season? Is it all over? Can the ecologists rub their little hands with glee and say, goody, goody, the herring got away? First, though, after the break, to Alec MacDonald in Victoria.
They're just showing the different sources of the program.
Dick Vogel, the Deputy Attorney General of the province of British Columbia, is now in his 5th day of suspension from duty with pay after allegations that he interfered improperly in 3 matters being handled by the laws of British Columbia. First, in the case of a family acquaintance. Second, in the case of Mickey Moran, a lawyer. And thirdly, in the Wendy King case, where the allegation is that Mr. Vogel made it clear to Bruce Donald and others in the senior city prosecutor's office that no matter what happened, he would stay any subpoena that might have been issued in the case of John Faris, the former Chief Justice of the Court of Appeal of British Columbia. But first this morning, I go to Victoria to ask Alec MacDonald, the former Attorney General in the NDP government, where precisely he stands and what he would have done, having heard Gardy Gardam make certain statements in the House of Legislature yesterday with relations to the rig case. Mr. MacDonald.
I would have with regret because, he's a good person. I would have fired Vogel immediately. And the reason I say that, Jack, is not that I'm a particularly virtuous person or anything of that kind, but in law, there's a line there, and the administration of justice must show no favoritism. There must be no suggestion whatsoever that somebody, because he can get his case up to the Deputy Attorney General or the Attorney General, can get better treatment in the courts than somebody else who's charged with impaired driving and takes his licking. Maybe he's from Vancouver East or something and he doesn't have any friends, and he gets his fine and his suspension and somebody else doesn't.
How can you say that, though, specifically right now? You and the NDP are asking for, I think, a judicial inquiry.
Yes.
But how can you say that right now? On what evidence can you say that had you been, or were you still the Attorney General, you would already, without a public inquiry or a judicial inquiry or even the Social Credit Departmental inquiry, have fired Dick Vogel?
Yes, I'm just saying on the set of facts as they've been presented, and I'm basing it upon what Gardam has said in answers in the legislature and upon what we think we know. We can't be positive, that's true.
What was it that Gardam said yesterday that caused you to make that statement last night and again this morning?
When I asked him whether it was true, as suggested, that Mr. Vogel did know the family of Riggs And when I asked him why this particular case out of 10,000 impaired cases came to the desk of the Deputy Attorney General in Victoria to be dealt with letters, he gave very unsatisfactory answers. Your point is perfectly valid that this should be vetted by a judge and not in this political process. We're fighting to get that kind of independent inquiry.
Was the rig matter actually brought to the attention of Gardaí Gardam, and what conclusion did he give you in the House that he had come to about the rig case?
We asked him about the letter from Bruce Donald, the Vancouver prosecutor, of November the 15th, 1978, in which he set out the details of the rig's complaint about interference, and also set out the Farah's complaint. And Gardam admitted he got that letter and turned it over to somebody below Vogel in the scheme of things over here, Mr. Neil McDermott, to investigate and report, and took no action and didn't even reply to the letter.
Did he admit did he say in his opinion that Vogel had committed an error of judgment?
He called it an error of judgment, but I say that favoritism is of a different kind of thing than error of judgment.
Now, this is the point I want to make to you this morning, Mr. MacDonald. There's a letter in the province from Wally Lightbody, the president of the BC branch of the Canadian Bar Association. And I'm going to take it that it's a real letter and that they checked it.
So I know Mr. Lightbody. I think it was probably his letter. But
All
I haven't
right,
seen
now,
it yet.
he takes strong objection, you might think, to the fact that it should be clearly pointed out that Crown officers, right up to the Deputy Attorney General, have a public duty to decide whether cases should be stayed, withdrawn, prosecuted, or appealed. What makes that different? What makes your position different from Lightbody's? Because of the favoritism?
Yes. Well, in addition, how come a case of a 17-year-old boy who was charged with impaired driving on West Broadway came to Victoria to be dealt with in some letters between the Deputy Attorney General and his counsel, John McAlpine, and the prosecutor?
But surely it's perfectly proper, even if I'm a lawyer in British Columbia, that I can go through the entire rigmarole from the prosecutor to the regional Crown Counsel to the Deputy Attorney General and make a special pitch?
No, you would get nowhere. I mean, in the ordinary case, you can't appeal over the prosecutor and say, I'm going to take this up to the Deputy Attorney General in Victoria. He couldn't possibly deal with all those cases.
Have you come to any decision on the value or the strength of the letter from Bruce Donald yet? And are you able to, for instance, the public are still wondering why the exhibits were sealed in the Farah's case. Have you come to a decision on that?
No, that's something we're moving on to in terms of questions. The other incident, we must consider that and try to see what Alan Williams is going to say about it, and Gardaí Gardam.
Has Williams indicated what kind of inquiry he's doing? Is it going to be purely departmental?
Well, we won't know until the end of the week. At the moment, he's doing an in-house inquiry, which we say is unsatisfactory, but perhaps at the end of the week we will have persuaded him to take it out of the political arena and let it be decided by an independent investigation.
What do you want, Mr. MacDonald, speaking for the NDP?
Independent investigation.
What does that mean? You mean...
Supreme Court judge of the Court of Appeal, something of that kind.
You mean as was done by, in the case where Mr. Seaton looked into the conduct of Mr. Vogel and the Phil Govan Family Relations Act matter?
Yes, and I would say it should be a public investigation. That's just my bent. I think it's better for the public who pay for the law system to see how it works and to follow the evidence in an inquiry of that kind. But even if it isn't public, at least an inquiry by a judge of considerable stature and courage.
Would it be correct for me to say, therefore, that those people who must be interviewed by the inquirer, preferably a judge, would have to include Bruce Donald?
Oh, of course.
And what about Chief Constable Donald Winterton? Because Bruce Donald makes the suggestion that his credibility has been affected by what the police think of what happened in the staying the subpoena allegation.
Yes, I would think that whole thing, whether or not it's proper for Victoria to interfere in a prosecution that is going to take place to the extent of saying you shall or shall not call this witness or that witness. It seems to me that's going too far in terms of Victoria running a case and interfering, and I think that should be looked at.
Is there not a grave danger here, to be deadly serious, Mr. MacDonald, that in the course of inquiries behind closed doors, that the public is entitled to be a little cynical and say, "I'll forget it, the legal profession always look after their own anyway"?
Well, that's why, while it should be a judge of stature, I would prefer an open hearing. I don't see anything wrong. We're not dealing with classified information that the Russians might get hold of, anything of that kind. I prefer an open inquiry where the witnesses are sworn and cross-examined. I think it should be expeditious. You don't want something running on for months.
Could be done in a week.
Well, yes, if they did it, yes, that's right. It could be. These inquiries could be done very quickly.
What's the
Mind
next?
you, they're not. They seem to live a life of their own, and everybody seems to take their time with them. But that's
What's
a
your
mistake.
next step in the House today on the Vogel crisis for the government?
Oh, I think we have to ask further questions about about the Ritchie case. I may want to say something about, well, I should say my friend as well, Judge Bewley.
Oh, you mean Bueller, who come out and said very bluntly that he was astonished at the uproar over Vogel. Why would you want to say anything about Bewley?
Well, he's also said in relation to me, and I had to think about it, that I interfered and my deputy interfered in what was the Sanucci case in 1974. And I'm going to have to raise a point of privilege in the legislature and point out the facts of that, because Judge Bewley, who is now on retainer to the provincial government, rather a dangerous thing, I might say, to take a judge and give him this work for the Heroin, Alcohol and Drug Commission, which is unconstitutional anyway, is sort of an extended long leave of absence on pay by the government. Anyway, he's got his facts all wrong and totally wrong about the Sanucci thing, and I probably have to raise it as a point of privilege.
As I recall the Sanucci case, a woman had been killed. A jury had recommended that charges be revived, and there was a hearing in front of Bewley of some kind, and then the Attorney General's Department did enter a stay of proceedings.
No, the stay had been entered at the earlier stages by the prosecutor, who I believe was Mr. Al Melvin, who's now a county court judge, on the basis that the Crown didn't feel it had evidence to prove the charge. And it was after that people said it should be reopened. And if I interfered in justice, I did by ordering a preliminary inquiry to go ahead anyway. And that took place, and the preliminary inquiry found that there wasn't evidence to commit the accused to a full trial.
In other words, you're saying that was a proper exercise by your office when Attorney General of entering a stay of proceedings because there was not ground for prima facie proper case.
That's right, and that position was upheld, the use of the stay was upheld by Justice Anderson in a later Supreme Court case.
And you'll be making your position clear in a point of privilege in the House in Victoria this afternoon?
I have no choice. I've been accused by Mr. Bewley of this, and I think I have to answer him.
You were accused of a very serious interference with the administration of justice.
That's right. I think I must set out the circumstances and show it's wrong. And I may take exception to Judge Bewley saying that the Riggs case, which was a case of a young boy charged with impaired driving that came before his court, was a trivial matter and hardly worth the time of a busy court. For a judge to make that kind of remark is, I think, most demeaning.
Well,
and a judge who's working on the Alcohol and Drug Commission for the last year and a half to make the remark that a charge of impaired driving against this particular boy was trivial? Ridiculous.
No such charge is trivial. Is that correct, Mr. MacDonald?
It is not trivial, charges of impaired driving, whether it's the Riggs boy or anybody else's boy. And they should all be treated equally.
My thanks to Alec MacDonald, NDP, former Attorney General. Be on his feet again this afternoon on the Vogel affair and perhaps on his point of personal privilege. Thank you, Mr. MacDonald.
Thank you.
Next, we go to the herring crisis in the waters off British Columbia with George Hewison and Jerry Spitz after the break. This is what I mean, this gone down legal profession makes you people look like babes in the woods.
We are.
Doesn't it?
Right.
The way they protect their own. If you were to ask me right now where the herring fishery stands in British Columbia, I might snicker and say, who knows? Last year was a bonanza year. $3,500 a ton for certain types of roe herring for the Japanese. Prices way beyond that paid by cash buyers out in the high seas. Everybody in the industry, I suppose, was looking forward to an absolutely smashing year again this year, subject to the quota laid by the Federal Fisheries Department. And now what's happened? The whole thing has disappeared. And as I said, George Hewison is the General Secretary-Treasurer of the United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union. And as I said this morning, can the ecologist people, who really don't like, herring fishing at all, rub their hands with glee and say, thank God they couldn't agree. Most of the herring will now get away to spawn. Is that the physical situation this morning?
No, I don't think that's the situation. I think what we've been saying all along is that the herring stocks have been in very tough shape right from the very beginning. We have reports that there's very poor showing of herring in all areas of the coast. There's been openings, even though there's been a strike and there's been scab fishermen out fishing the fish. And the Fisheries Department has allowed openings where clearly there shouldn't be openings. So I don't think there's anything to cheer about insofar as the stocks themselves, and that's leaving the strike itself out of the picture.
Well, is unionized fishing, or rather the UFAWU and the Native Brotherhood, and do you bargain together?
Yes, we do.
Are you now not fishing for herring this season?
It appears that way. The season is, I would think either at 11:45 or perhaps 12:15 for a lot of fishermen. They're putting their gear away and they're looking at no season at all.
Are you happy about this? Jerry Spitz is the Fisheries Association of BC. Why couldn't you get together and do the minimal fishing which might have been allowed for your fleet of boats represented by the UFAWU and the Native Brotherhood?
Well, we tried very hard, Jack. We wanted to fish, and we do want to fish this year, particularly because the market collapsed in Japan, and we want to try to rebuild it. So we're very disappointed that we didn't get an opportunity to go and do it.
Who's to blame?
Well, it'd be easy to blame the union for the problems, but it's probably a little deeper than that. It's probably a lack of understanding by everyone in the industry as to exactly what kind of a situation we're in. We're in a situation where we've got one market for herring, roe, in the world, and that market's been on the rise, on a very dramatic rise over the last 8 years with a few bumps in it. And the consumers in Japan have been pushed and pushed in terms of prices, and they finally stopped. They boycotted the products and said, we're not going to pay those prices. So we're charged with responsibility of meeting the needs of that market, and we're not able to do so.
Can't they get herring elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, they can get herring elsewhere, but there's a lot of confidence in British Columbia herring.
What will be the loss to the fishing industry all over by no major fishing this season?
This season? Well, it's difficult to determine how much herring is going to be caught, but let's just say for a rough figure that we could have doubled the production by fishing, and that's not for sure, but that's a pretty good estimate. I would think then that there's a good chance of losing $20, $30, $40, $50 million.
Two things. Did you not allege through the union that Mitsubishi or somebody had tried to corner the market last year and failed, and that there is in fact still a market in Japan at a reasonable price?
Well, what we did was we sent a delegation, a fact-finding mission to Japan, and their estimation and their conclusions were that the Mitsubishi certainly had attempted to corner the market. That partially explains the price war that was on the fishing grounds last year. It also is explained by the fact that they've tripled the price to the consumer in Japan for their finished product over 2 years ago, and there was certainly the resistance was to that attempt to corner the market by raising the price rather than by cutting the price. And so that left us in a position that we believe that the market is being manipulated. And I just got to say that to Jerry that many of the same forces and the same capital that's involved, the big Japanese trading companies that have cornered the market, are members of his association.
True or false?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way.
Well, put it your way.
First of all, I think
And if he's wrong, tell him so.
I'll do that.
the manipulation of the Japanese market is a completely non-issue. It's the only game in town. Now, it's very easy to say, well, Mitsubishi tried to get too much product, or Hokusho tried to get too much product, but it's a free enterprise market in Japan. It's also easy to say the retailers take too much of a markup, or the wholesalers take too much of a markup.
How can it be free enterprise, Jerry, when there's only 3 corporations that dominate the whole thing. Basically, Hokusho is a subsidiary of Mitsubishi.
Well, that's not exactly true, George, and there's a hell of a lot more than 3 companies in Japan that are importing herring and herring roe and putting it out into the marketplace. Mitsubishi, I think we'll have to admit, tried to get a lot of product last year. So
They
did
bought into
Hokusho.
Canadian fish right now.
And Hokusho paid the price. They dropped $250 million and went bankrupt. That's what happens in a free market if you make a mistaken judgment. But I don't think that's
Is
an
that
issue.
right? Did Hokusho go bankrupt?
But they didn't lose $250 million based on the herring because the entire product isn't worth $250
No, they
million.
lost $125 million on herring.
But that's the total value of the total British Columbia production we're talking about.
Yeah.
How can they lose $125 million? What we're dealing
That's
with
the
is
value
manipulation. Marubeni, it was a power play by Mitsubishi to take over and corner the market, and Hokusho is a foster child of Mitsubishi.
Look, anytime a company wants to speculate on a market like this, it's a commodity market. The companies in Japan are buying herring in the spring and speculating on the prices in the following December. If they make a mistake, they get hurt, and that's exactly what happened. But that's not an issue. The issue is the consumers have said no. They won't pay those prices.
How much were they charging retail in Japan last year?
They tried to charge, as George and others have said, they've tried to charge anywhere from $20, $30, up to $45, $50 a pound.
A pound?
That's right.
That
But
was
they
why
didn't
you-
do it.
Well, they did buy some at that price, and then the consumers, the housewives, got mad and said, no way. And, we're now past the buying season, which is between September and January, and they're saying that they've organized a boycott. But it's because of that market manipulation.
But the boycott is agreed. You both agreed that there is buyer resistance in Japan for herring.
That's right.
Mind you, last year you must have rubbed your hands with glee. I mean, a number of fishermen made instant fortunes last year, didn't they?
Well, I think we're faced with this situation, Jack, that these 3 or 4 Japanese trading companies have moved into the industry. They've seen an opportunity for a fast buck. They don't really care about the resource. They don't care that they leave empty plants behind or that they leave the fishermen with tremendous mortgages and capitalization. Many of them have moved in, and I predicted this last year, that the Fisheries Association companies would either do one of 2 things. They'd either fight and drive them off, or they would come to some kind of an accommodation, and some are going under. And that's precisely what's taken place.
Are you telling me that
Cassiar Packing Company, which is a member of the Fisheries Association, is basically bankrolled by Marubeni. And they're also bankrolling about 6 other companies in the BC fishing industry. And they're going to be the price leader this year.
What do you say to that?
Well, there's no question there's some foreign investment in equity position in the BC fishing industry, but it's nowhere near to the extent that's being claimed. FIRA has watched this thing. I think that George made reference to Cassiar Packing Company. It's no secret that Cassiar Packing Company has Marubeni Corporation as a minority shareholder in that company, but I don't think that's at issue at all. The issue here is that we have an opportunity in Japan to have a good $100 million or more market a year for British Columbia, with 20,000 jobs and good incomes for everybody. But we have to recognize that we've got to supply the consumer with what she wants.
In other words, you're saying that at $650 a ton for gillnet and $350 a ton for seine net, you could still be fishing.
That's right.
For a quota of what?
Well, 35,000 is what the government said.
And you say nonsense.
Well, we say that we've been saying all along that we think the stocks are in some difficulty, and that gets into another realm, the federal government, and what we believe is their complicity in allowing this kind of a situation to go on.
Well, talk to me about that. We'll talk about that. This is quite interesting this morning. After the break. Just let me get something clear with my 2 experts, George Hewison of the UFAWU and Jerry Spitz of the Fisheries Association. There will now be no union fishing this season, is that correct?
Well, unless if there's large stocks and, you know, start to show up, and if the fishermen get the price that they're looking at.
Haven't you rejected their offer?
We've rejected that offer as massive cuts.
Okay, Labour negotiator Webster. 650. Last year you gave how much? You gave, was it 1,200?
$1,200.
1,200 for gillnet and 650 for seine. This year you're offering 650 for gillnet and 350 for seine. Is that your final offer?
That was our final offer.
Was.
That, yeah, well, it still is.
Will you come up if large stocks appear?
Nope.
So that means no fishing.
That's the dilemma we're faced with.
You want
all the way through the strike.
You came down to 1,050 against their 650 and 630 against their 350.
That's right.
Game over.
Well, it appears to be that because our membership is not prepared to fish for the kind of cuts that are being imposed on us. We're prepared to negotiate, I might add, and we have indicated that all the way through.
Are you prepared still to negotiate?
Sure, we're prepared to talk, but we're not prepared to go above the offer we made. The offer we made was based on hard economic facts.
So you're not.
It wasn't a negotiating stance to try to fool a union into knuckling under. It was calculated to take into account the market, the costs that we have, and we offered the best price we could. I think the union know that. They went to the marketplace, they took a look at it, and in my judgment, the union is well aware of it, but they've made a decision, or the fishermen have made a decision, that regardless of the circumstances and the ability to pay, that's not enough money for fishing. But the thing that you've got to look at in perspective is that, sure, last year the prices were $1,200. The actual prices on the fishing grounds were over $3,000 a ton last year.
Some 5.
And it went up as high as $5,000. But the year before, the minimum price was $400 and some odd dollars, and the year before it was some $200 and some odd dollars. So you have to look at 1979 as a fluctuation in that market.
You mean a freak year?
A freak year.
Well, I think there's recognition that that certainly is the case, but looking at all the market factors, we certainly believe the association can pay more. As a matter of fact, a number of small independent companies that have got the squeeze play put on by the larger companies have come along and have made an offer which is somewhat in excess of what the
I thought you turned that down.
Our membership has turned that down.
That's quality fish.
But what it indicates is that there is more money there, that they can't afford to pay more, and what they're looking at is when the roe buying season in Japan gets underway, that in fact the market is going to improve. We're looking at a situation right now as it is right now. And for the last 6 or 7 years, every year that the association has come along with a price, that is a minimum price, and what's happened is that they've always paid higher on the grounds. We say that there is more money there.
Well, I can't argue. The history has been that when we negotiate a minimum price, if there's more money in the fish, that goes to the fishermen. Because the basic system that operates in BC, and it's one of the few places in the world that it operates, is you've got a free, competitive marketing situation on the fishing grounds. As soon as
You're dealing with the union, though, aren't you?
No, we're dealing with fishermen, whether they're members of the union or not members of the union or members of the Brotherhood or whatever they're members of. The prices that are paid to fishermen are set on the grounds competitively and to reflect the market. We're not dealing with a group of hourly wage earners or laborers. We're dealing with people, whether they like it or not, are in a commodity market.
You mean the free enterprises?
Well, they're not free enterprises. They're people that are going out there with the boats and that are probably mortgaged right up to their ears. They're building, they've got punts. They've committed themselves to an operation, and without their labor, those fish stay in the water. They work darn hard. They take a lot of risk. And they want to make sure that when they go out there that they're going to get a fair return for their labor. And right now, they're saying that if the whole fleet is out there, 1,300 gill nets and 249 seine boats with all their crews, the kind of prices that are offered, it would be better off to leave the fish in the water and tell the Japanese to get lost.
Well, 2 years ago, the prices went up a couple 100%. The fishermen liked the free market. Last year, the prices went up 500%. Fishermen liked the free market. This year, the prices go down. Fishermen don't like the free market anymore. That's the situation.
But they are free enterprises because some of them might lose their big new boats they bought last year.
Well, that's always the difficulty, and a fisherman has to weigh up the fact that his expenses are going up. Everything has gone up based on these prices, and that's based on the kind of manipulation that's been going on with the big boys.
Why did you negotiate with Quality Fish? Somebody said they were non-union. Was it you that said they were non-union, or was it you, George?
No, it was the association. We reject that. It's one of the terms that they agreed to was that their plant, which we've been trying to organize for some years, becomes a union plant, and that was one of the terms of settlement. and certainly they did. And the other company that came along, they also agreed to that same
What was its
condition.
name?
That was Griffin.
Griffin. So Griffin and Quality Fish said, we'll give you more than the Fisheries Association, and we'll also let you sign up our people in the union, the shore workers.
They'll sign shore agreements, and they'll have full union shop insofar as they work.
But now that you've rejected their offer, they don't have to.
That agreement is off.
What did you feel about them dealing with Quality Fish?
Well, we've got nothing against Quality Fish or Joe Griffin's company. They're perfectly free to do whatever they want. It is coincidental. They were non-union plants up until, at least until Sunday. But that's not the beef we have. The beef we have, or the question I should say, we have is for the union. We have no legal obligation to bargain with the UFAW or with the Native Brotherhood for the minimum prices of fish, nor do they have any legal obligation to bargain with us. What we have is a long traditional relationship based on a little bit of trust and faith and a little bit of threat and a few other things that are involved in it, but it's not a legal requirement. So we're asking ourselves if every time we get into a scrap is UFAW's new policy to go outside of that bargaining relationship, look for somebody else to bargain with. If that's the case, maybe we should be asking ourselves whether we should be bargaining with UFAW, because the majority of fishermen don't belong to the union or the Brotherhood. Maybe we should be talking to them.
Just let me...
There's an implied threat. He
well,
says, first
that's
of all...
not an implied threat. That's a very direct threat.
The
And
majority...
that's one that was being made across the bargaining table. But nevertheless, what Jerry is saying is that this is something new. I think the association knows that it's been a long-standing policy that we've negotiated with many, and signed agreements with many companies that are not members of the Fisheries Association. We have seafoods, we've got mallards, we've got a whole host of them. And we've also had a policy over the years that if it looks like there's a stalemate with the Fisheries Association, we've always reserved the right to sign contracts with anyone that's prepared to negotiate with us. We've got a policy from the Fisheries Association. They're saying this is it, this is final, no more. And it leaves us in the position of losing the entire season or capitulating to the position that's being put forward, the ultimatums.
2 points he made. One, the majority of fishermen are non-union. True or false?
I would say that it's probably about, if you exclude the co-ops, I would say the majority are members of the union or the Native Brotherhood.
If you exclude the co-op.
But just one more point. In
you
this
won't
particular
go along with
strike,
that at all, will you?
No, I don't go along with that.
Just in this particular strike, we would estimate that over 3/4 of the fishermen support this strike because they don't want to see price cuts imposed on them.
Even if they're non-union?
Even if they're non-union.
Or non-brotherhood?
They're out manning the picket lines right now, independent fishermen.
I hate to raise this old Hardy annual that's been going around for 20 years. Is he right when he says that you're not a bargaining agent?
Well, he keeps raising it, but since 1893, we've been bargaining with fish companies, and we've been going on strike and doing all the things that other working people do.
Withdrawing your labor.
And
but technically, you're not a union.
Well, the courts and the governments in this country still try to keep fishermen in the 19th century. In Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and Newfoundland and every other province except progressive British Columbia, fishermen have a legal right to strike. But the employers have refused to accept that concept.
Is that right?
Well, the union members, fishermen, have a right to stop fishing and have stop selling fish to the members of our association. We've never challenged that. The only thing that's in question is whether or not the union should stop all the other fishermen from fishing.
The scab fishermen?
Well, you can call them scab fishermen, but since they're in the majority, I think they probably resent the term. The situation is that they are licensed by the Government of Canada, not by the UFAW.
One final question.
Well, just let me answer that. You see, this is precisely the argument that was used in the United States. They brought the Sherman Antitrust Act in there to break a union of 25,000 members. But despite that, last year in Bristol Bay, where there was a big sockeye run, the fishermen there did strike, even though they don't have a union, and they boycotted one of
that's
parent company.
Classic withdrawal of labor.
Now what's happened, one of the companies there has fired 200 of the ringleaders of that strike, and they're mounting massive lawsuits against the fishermen that took part in that strike. And that's the situation that the fishermen in British Columbia are faced. And willy-nilly, that situation will not go away despite the position of the employers and despite the non-recognition by government. The fishermen are going to continue to fight because they require minimum price agreements and they require organization.
One question I've got to ask you. You said that fishermen on the East Coast have a legal right to strike. You don't have a legal right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Why the difference? What legal right do they have that you don't,
Because
that you can't have here?
Because a liberal government in Newfoundland and
Oh,
a
provincial government.
conservative government in Nova Scotia and now New Brunswick is bringing in legislation to codify and to bring fishermen within the bounds of their labor code.
Provincial Labour Code.
Right.
You're not in the Provincial Labour Code, and so far you're excluded from the Federal
So
Labour
it keeps
Code.
you out of jail as a fisherman and it keeps you from getting all the injunctions and the lawsuits
Okay,
and the
well,
damage actions.
there's a big difference. The fishermen on the East Coast, to a large extent, work on big trawlers that are company-owned. What you've got in British Columbia is probably the most efficient and largest, one of the best, small boat fleets. And 88% of the fleet is owned by individuals.
Free enterprise, you'll say.
That's
But the
right.
small
But
boat
that's
fleet in
not the
Newfoundland
issue.
is covered, Jerry.
That's not the issue at all. The issue here is that we, as an association, have up until now not attempted to break the bargaining relationship with the UFAW.
Nor will you.
I'm saying now they've opened the door and we have to ask the question. I'm not threatening to do it, but that's a fair question.
After the break. With Jerry Spitz of the Fisheries Association and George Hewison of the Union, we ran into a rather delicate situation. Jerry Spitz puts his eyebrows up and says, well, you never know. Do you plan to continue bargaining or what's that effect? Well, you never know, because of the quality fish thing, which has upset you considerably. Is that correct?
Yes, it has. This is the first time, to my knowledge, in history where the union has recommended acceptance of an agreement on minimum prices without making it first to the association.
No, that's not true. And what we did say was that, and we phoned all the companies, including the members of the Fisheries Association, and said, this is our position, and we would be prepared to mount a fishing operation. And those
At
companies,
those prices?
and those companies that are prepared to accept on that basis, you know, we'd be prepared to recommend acceptance. And that isn't the first time that that's happened. And it's certainly not the first time that we've had negotiations with non-association companies. That goes on all the time.
If I could just sum up for the moment for the benefit of mystified listeners, mystified viewers. You were off radio 2 years ago, Webster. One, there may be 35,000 metric tons of herring which can properly be taken this season. Is that correct, gentlemen? There may be.
There may be, but it's
Unlikely
questionable.
Last year, when up to 5,000 was paid on the grounds, was a freak year. Everybody's agreed to that.
That's right.
There is a consumer boycott in Japan of some kind, right?
Yes, there is.
Agreed.
And you have come down to low prices, $6.50 and $3.50, I think it was, something like that. And the lowest you'll come down is, and the recommendation from the union, is $7.65, which is 100 and a quarter, and $400.
No, that was rejected by our membership.
But you recommended it. Your
We recommended it
executive
as a negotiating committee.
So you don't think they'd even go out to fish on these prices?
They've said no, they're not prepared to.
All right, I'd like to know now, who is scab and what is scab and what is hot and what is not hot and who is fishing?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, maybe George can have more detailed information because his people are out in the fishing grounds and ours are at home on the beach. But to my knowledge, there are several independent companies operating and buying fish at prices lower than we've offered the union, basically.
500 a ton.
In that range, and there are two major co-ops out fishing. And
Are they up in the north?
one is the Central Native Fishermen's Cooperative, and the other one is the Prince Rupert Fishermen's Co-op.
Can they get that processed without it being declared hot? Yes, they've got their own shore plant.
They've got their own plants, but as far as hot declarations go, that's strictly up to the UFAW.
Well, just on the question of the companies that are scab, as far as we're concerned, we have a number of them out there, 4 or 5 of them out there buying, as you say, lower, and they're getting the fish at bargain basement prices. We've made attempts to shut those operations down because we know that fish is ultimately going to find its way back into the same marketplace that we're striking against. Oakland Industries, for example, has an injunction against us, restraining us from interfering in any way, shape, or form, interfering with with their production.
Is that
And
somewhere up on the
and
West Coast?
No, it's in Victoria. But Oakland Industries is bankrolled lock, stock, and barrel by Marubeni of Japan, the same company that is bankrolling a half a dozen companies that we're on strike against.
But the fishermen, whoever's fishing them, is getting it into Oakland and it's being processed.
And at bargain basement prices. The same thing is true with we don't know where this new company that was set up in Nanaimo, just on the eve of the strike, but quite likely it's also bankrolled by some of the companies that we're on strike against. It makes good economic sense. If I were sitting in Jerry's position, that's precisely what I would do. Clearly,
That's not, we're not involved in anything like that. As a matter of fact, it's not very pleasant for us to have the union trying to keep us shut down while there's other companies operating. But the fact of the matter is, what you've got is a group of fish buyers and a group of producers who are prepared to deal with each other, and who are we to say they can't deal with each other? A group of fishermen that say they want to fish at a certain price, sell their fish to one of those companies. They're happy with it. Much as we don't like it, what the heck can we do about it?
Can they pick up the whole quota, these people who are out now?
I'll bet you they can pick up half or more.
well, they certainly have that capacity unless
And you
we
can't
can,
really stop them. All you
well,
can
we're
do
trying
is
to shut them down.
you can
Our
blacklist
picketers,
them
well,
for-
we're picketing the sites and picketing the operations where it's been legal, and certainly there's a lot of steam and a lot of bad feelings in our membership.
Can
over
you
the fact-
blacklist them for next year if they
Well,
scab fish this
look-
year in your eyes?
Look, Jack, you know very well that Simon Wapniarski from the Combines branch is probably watching this program and is probably going to be into your newsrooms to steal the tapes so he can take them back to Ottawa in order to put the Fishermen's Union out of business. That's their aim.
Where are you, Mr. Wapniarski? Can't see him anywhere around.
He came into your newsroom last year and seized a lot of your film clippings.
How long to go on this segment? I'm going to go to phone calls, but I want to ask another question before I go to phone calls. You said earlier that there is complicity of the Federal Fisheries Department, obviously, to assist the Fisheries Association. Can you back up that charge?
Well, they're certainly having openings and closures where there's absolutely no justification for the same in order to apply pressure on the strikers.
You mean to let the people you call scab go in and fish?
That's right. In one area, for instance, last night in a place called Norwest Bay, they had 200 tons, or 200 vessels rather, fishing, punts, gill nets, fishing for 100 tons of fish, which is just not economically viable. And yet there just isn't the fish. They're picking up 18 herring per set, 20 herring, that kind of thing, and yet the department is continuing to allow that to be opened when in fact it should be closed down solid for conservation reasons. Another area they open up for 6 seine boats. They load their seines to find that there's no roe content there to justify a fishery. They dump the fish with a 25% or 30% kill of the fishery. Now, if that isn't trying to apply the pressure on the fishermen, I don't know what is, and it's just absolutely unjustified.
Well, I don't have to defend the federal government.
No.
They're quite capable of defending themselves. But in my judgment, that's a lot of bunk. The federal government would make us mad if they started to interfere in the strike situation that we have, the relationship we have with the UFAW and the Native Brotherhood. As far as we're concerned, that's none of their business. Their job is to conserve the stocks, to manage those stocks, and to open whatever fisheries can be open on the basis of conservation and catching. And to the best of my knowledge, that's exactly what they're doing. The only exception that has been brought to my attention is that because we're not out in the fishing grounds with packers, they have closed areas because there are no packers to take away the fish, and they're afraid some of the fish might get dumped. But other than that, I have never talked to the government and asked them to do us any favors. I don't think the union has asked them to do them any favors, and I don't think anybody has. I think that they're just trying to operate as if we weren't even around. And that's the only thing they can do. If they start playing games with us and trying to intervene in the strike, then we'll start screaming too, and I'm sure the union will.
Well, we already are screaming about
All right,
the thing.
20,000 jobs at stake. You're firm in your offer, you're firm in your position, and the public was left with a feeling at the end of last year's bonanza year that given the, I must put this both to you quite brutally, that given the permission, you people, because of the fantastic money last year, would go in there and skip, and pick out every bleeding herring in the sea.
Not at all.
Is that too cynical?
I don't think either
because
one
of the
us,
big money.
One of us, both of us would have to fight that. We don't take a single fish that is not allowed to us by the government conservation officers and the scientists. Now, if there's an error in judgment by the scientists, We have no control over it, and we would fight harder. I think both of us, the union and our organization, would fight harder than anybody else, including Greenpeace, to preserve our stocks, because this is no hobby for us. This is our lifelong livelihood.
George?
Well, I don't like to be disagreeable, but you know, we have advanced two separate proposals for the management of the herring fishery. The one which has been advanced by, you know, basically those interests representing capital, which is to go out there and take it as quickly as possible with with a large segment of the fleet in a free-for-all Cape fishery, and the proposal which is being advanced by the union, which is one that is going to slow it down and to try and bring some sanity back into the operation. Just on the question of what the Fisheries Department does, they've all along, they've gone along with the type of proposal put forward by those interests representing capital. And that, you can't escape the fact that in the openings that we've had, in some areas there's been absolutely no justification based on conservation for having those kind of openings.
Okay, George, you're getting away from me on that, but you plead not guilty to my cynical observation that given the opportunity,
No,
every
Jack.
fisherman at 5,000 a ton would go out and scoop up every bleeding herring.
Well, I'm not. No, they wouldn't. They're concerned about the resource. The people, they've got their boats, they've got their net. They don't want to just have a one-year operation. The bona fide fishermen, there may be some out there that don't intend to be in the industry more than a year or two.
School teachers.
But those people that want to be there all the way, make their career in fishing, they want to see that resource last
Fair
for their
enough.
children.
Bad news for you this morning. It doesn't look like there's going to be any major herring fishermen, just some small operations and the Central Native
Fishermen's Co-op.
Fishermen's Co-op up north, and there's fishing in the Gulf. Is that no?
That's basically what we call a scab operation.
A scab operation in the Gulf. Questions for Spitz and Hewison after the break. George, any calls to you, you answer into that camera, and Jerry calls to you, you answer into that one. That's away so far back you can have to see it.
Gotcha.
Right. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster, I'd like to talk to Jerry Spitz, please.
Okay, just go straight ahead with your question on every occasion. We can skip them, but good morning niceties.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Spitz, I'd like to...
Yes?
Yes, Mr. Spitz, I'd like to ask you, don't you think the multinationals have come in here and bought up the companies and are trying to control the fishing industry?
Well, frankly, a couple of years ago, this was a pretty major concern of ours. We were concerned that the marketplace, Japan primarily, was trying to get a greater control of supply and move in. But really what has happened, I think, and this is a classic example, is as long as the prices are high, the demand is high, the value is high, they're moving in various different ways, trying to get more supply. But as soon as the value goes down, the demand goes down, they're gone. I mean, the number of Japanese sponsored companies that were around last year was an incredible number. This year, there's very few of them around. They seem to be drifting out. I really don't know that the question of foreign ownership in the fishing industry should be any different than...
Has the Foreign Investment Review Board rejected any takeovers?
I
Have there
have
been
no
any
knowledge.
takeovers?
Jack,
I believe they have, yes.
Look, let's be
There
frank
have been
about it.
takeovers.
There have been lots of takeovers. The Foreign Investment Review Agency has no teeth to deal with this. Where you're dealing with existing foreign ownership or where you're dealing with equity capital coming through the back door. You know, what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with, let's take Mitsubishi, $40 billion last year in assets. That was what they figured. They're on a scale with General Motors. They can create the market. They can break the market. They make Garfield Weston look like a corner grocery store.
Hardly.
Well, Garfield Weston's assets on a world scale are about 10 or 11 billion. They're very much smaller. And they use that power and that strength to move in where they want to move in.
Anyway, you say there have been some takeovers. You say there are backdoor takeovers. What difference does it make to anybody sitting here who owns the industry? They own the mines anyway. We've got all kinds of multinationals in the lumber industry.
Jack, in spite of all these accusations, you got to remember that we can stack up the fishing industry against almost any other industry in Canada. The majority of the BC fishing industry is Canadian-owned.
Ken Fiscal, BC Packers.
BC Packers is a Canadian company. Canadian Fishing Company has a parent company in Seattle, but they've been working in Canada for 70 or 80 years.
They're the big boys, aren't they?
Wow.
And you go down the list, Macmillan, Ocean, right down the list.
Nelson, are they still in the business? Yeah.
Nelson's
But
are
who are they
BC
bankrolled by?
Packers.
That's the point.
Where they borrow their money, the nationality of their money, I don't know, and I don't know how in the heck George knows.
Well, because we study the debentures, that some of it's a matter of public record and some of it we know where their product goes to.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, a question for George. If the companies would have come up with the offer that Quality Fish come up, the only reason it was turned down is they couldn't see 13 boats going out and them sitting on the beach. That's why it was turned down. But I'm sure if the companies would have come up with an offer like that, would you have recommended acceptance?
I'm sure that there would have. We recommended acceptance on the basis. I think we recognize we want to see an operation. We wanted to see an operation. We don't like the idea of losing a season. You know, that's been our position. There's no doubt in my mind there would have been that kind of a recommendation. I don't know what the outcome of the vote, whether the membership would have accepted it.
The membership turned you down on the quality recommendation.
Right.
And you wouldn't come up anyway.
No, we couldn't. We couldn't afford to come up.
Are you a fisherman?
Right.
How much did you lose this season by not fishing for herring?
Well, 300,000-400,000.
3 for what?
300,000 or 400,000.
You own your own boat.
Right.
How much do you owe on it?
Nothing.
Well, you can afford to just take a year off.
I can't afford it. I got to pay last year's income tax. I spent the money.
How much is last year's income tax?
Too much.
Well,
Are you a union member?
No.
he'd be a vessel owner, I guess, at that
You're a
point.
vessel owner. Still a fisherman, I suppose.
Still
well,
a fisherman.
are you a crew union?
Right.
They are. Okay, much obliged. Sorry about the 400,000. I can loan you $5 if you're broke.
Our members, I just want to say this, our membership didn't make any $300,000 or $400,000, that's for sure.
I know some ferry workers that walked away with a bundle from punts. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering, first of all, there was the New York Stock Exchange released a figure that the BC economy would lose $150 million if there was no operation this year, herring operation.
Jerry said about 50 million because of the reduced catches predicted. Is that
Well,
right?
it's just a wild guess,
guessing.
Jack.
Yes, I know he said that, and that I have a figure that's 40 million for one particular major company, but I have a figure $150 million.
So what's your message?
Well, I just wanted to put that point in, and I have a question for George Hewison.
Thank you. Courtney, BC, go ahead.
Well, why should an independent fisherman that owns his own boat be forced to deal with a predominantly communist organization?
George, I'll leave that to you.
Well, you know, I don't know where this one came from, out of the 50s, I suppose.
Now, why don't you just say, why should an independent fisherman who owns his own boat have to deal with the union?
Period, yeah.
Well, clearly they don't have to, and the option is clear. But there is a bargaining relationship in the industry. There's certainly the independents are going to be getting whatever the union negotiates. And right now, if the union were to settle with the Fisheries Association for $750 or $1,000, there's no doubt the independents are going to be there, and they're going to say, me too.
Well, that's a fair statement by George, isn't it?
Yes, it is, except that that the prices in recent years have predominantly been well above the minimum prices.
Are you fishing now?
No, we're not fishing because it's much too dangerous even to go out in the grounds to fish.
What do you mean, why?
Because, for instance, in French Creek, we had the side of our truck kicked in, Union boys on the grounds. It's the same up north. The fellas had their nets cut. It's a dangerous situation out there.
Were you out fishing, ma'am?
No, we're not out fishing.
Oh, well, how do you know that this is going on? This is the first I've heard of that.
Come home.
What about the kicking in the truck? Who kicked in your truck?
It was what they call the goon squad was on duty down in French Creek.
That's ridiculous.
It's always the first you've heard of that, and half the fishermen on the coast are afraid of this union.
I know this, that there's an awful lot of feeling, very strong feeling, that anybody, and there's a very small minority that are out there that are undermining the effort of the vast majority of the fishermen to prevent price cuts and to make a decent living for themselves. And when they see people out there trying to take advantage by the price going up,
because you can make a good living even at $600 a ton.
you won't make a good living with 1,300 punts out there and 249 vessels. You'll make a good living if you're prepared to go out scabbing and take advantage and catch the fish that would normally be caught by your fellow fishermen.
Thanks, ma'am. Did you report your truck bashing to the police?
Yeah, no, we haven't, because what happens then is you get threats on your boat and on your person.
Nonsense.
That's exactly the way the union works, and it's a terrifying situation.
That's what you say, and George says nonsense. After the break. We're having a $50 million wake this morning. That's what it is. It's a $50 million wake. No herring fishery to speak of. Although, how many would you say are out now?
It's, I don't know the numbers of fishermen, but it's a bigger than a $50 million wake. Jack, what we're trying to do this year, without the cooperation of the union apparently, was to rebuild that market so that we could have a $100 or $150 million fishery every year, not just this year.
You mean sell it cheap this year and suck them in again?
Well, I wouldn't use those words, but that's right. Bring the consumers back.
Yeah, you manipulated the market, created the mess in the first place.
Mitsubishi
Well, but they're related to them, you see. Mitsubishi has bought into Canadian fish. Marubeni is bankrolling.
They weren't paying $5,000 a ton. You were paying $3,500.
Tayo Giogo is, certainly not an arm's length relationship with BC Packers. They're the ones that have created the mess in the first place, and they want the fishermen to bear the brunt of the thing in terms of rebuilding.
Well, that's a lot of bunk. You see, George relates a buyer-seller relationship. A cooperative arrangement between a selling company in British Columbia and a buying company in Japan is somehow being in bed together. Well, if that's the case, we're in bed with operations in Paris, France, and London, England, in Germany, and every other market that we have. We have relationships with buyers over
But they're right on your board of directors. That's my point.
Well, there's nobody on my board of directors.
Well, the
from
Canadian
Japan.
Fishing Company, which is one of the major companies in your association, Mitsubishi, has directorships on that. They've taken over minority stock.
You're losing me, gentlemen, with your internecine warfare. The fact remains is that you want to bring the price down to sell it back in the Japanese market. They want they're prepared to have it come down. They've obviously come down to, your last offer was 1,050 as against 650. That's way down from last year, isn't it?
Well done.
From what you were getting. And these are minimum prices.
Just minimums.
You pay more on the water if the demand is there for Japan.
If the demand is there, we not only pay more on the water, but we've proven to the fishermen that if the money comes later, like in the summer or next fall, that also goes back to the fishermen. But what you've got here, and I want to quote Byron Wright for a moment, he said, and I agree with him, that you got the weird situation here of producers on strike against the consumers.
They're the producers, and through you to the consumers.
That's right.
In other words, we're not going to give you the stuff to buy.
That's right.
But isn't that the case in every strike?
Essentially, that's the point of every strike. We're trying to, but these guys are the fellows that control the situation, and they control it through their interlocking directorships and through those trading companies. There's now no longer
You maintain it's a whole total conspiracy.
The people who control the Fisheries Association have nothing more nor less than a non-arm's length relationship with the Japanese trading companies.
Why should they want to have their plants closed down and all that revenue lost this year? Why should they want that?
Because they're getting it through these scab companies. That's the point. Oakland Industries.
Are you getting anything through
Oakland
scab
Industries?
Nothing.
Well, Jerry may be just the spokesman for the Fisheries Association, but members of his association.
I apologize.
No. But members of his association have other companies, have cousins that are getting that product to market. Oakland Industries is one that I've named.
But they won't-
Carry is another one.
Auckland won't carry anything like the allowable quota catch this year, will
Well,
they?
they've got a fair plant. They've got a fair
Go ahead,
operation.
please.
Yes, Jack. First of all, I'd like to make a statement that the fishermen all have been asked to take a hell of a big cut this year. At the same time, the price of all fishing gear is more than doubling. I don't think that's fair. And my questions are to Jerry Spitz, and I'm going to put them in 3 parts and try and make as quick as I can.
Good.
First of all, Spitz seems to trying to give your viewers impression that the ground prices go up 200 to 300% after every price negotiations. That isn't true.
You mean minimum prices? Okay, next one.
Ground prices.
Ground prices.
That's why we have to negotiate for minimum prices to make sure that isn't going below that, because there are times when that ground price goes backwards, and it's happened here on the BC coast, and it happened in San Francisco Bay during the herring roll season this year.
Next question.
And I'd like to ask Spitz, how much of the Alaska production is the Fisheries Association going? What is their share of the Alaska production?
Next question.
And over the last few years, their share of the production, both salmon and herring, has dropped quite a bit, quite a lot, the percentage of production, because the independents are leaving the companies to sell to other companies who are paying a lot higher prices than the association companies.
Okay, 3 complex questions. I'll put them briefly. He's afraid of your ground prices. He says they've gone down before on the grounds. Has that ever happened?
Well, it's entirely possible. In recent years, they've gone up, but I'm not trying to kid anybody. The minimum prices we've offered this year, and given the market scene that we see, I can't see any wild prices going up too high above those minimum prices.
What percentage of the Alaska production do you get?
Well, I have very little, if any, that I know of. It's a very expensive operation, bringing herring down from Bristol Bay.
Well, they don't, but your parent companies get all that production through New England Fishing Company and through Nelbro, which is a subsidiary of BC Packers. And Marubeni has about 1/3 of the entire production in Alaska, and that's related to Cassiar and to...
I don't know the situation in Alaska, but it's patently obvious that the Canadian Fishing Company is affiliated with New England Fish, and whatever New England gets up there, that's their business. As far as Nelson Brothers goes, or Nelbro Fisheries in Alaska, they're a small subsidiary of BC Packers, a Canadian-owned company, and if they get any fish out of Alaska, I say good for them.
Yeah.
Is your percentage of the total take dropping, the Fisheries Association, because of the independents breaking away from you?
Not at all. Our association membership has been growing, but he's right. The caller is correct that our percentage of the herring roll catch as an association has been dropping over the past couple of years. I think the reason for it is obvious. There's all these new companies starting up, a lot of very hectic activity and speculation on the fishing grounds, and primarily because these new companies are non-union or non-brotherhood in their plants, and they've got a better cost picture than we have. The other thing
That's
is
George's
that
fault.
we have to operate on a year-round basis, so we can't just take a high-profit section like herring that has been a good section for good values, and take profits and run. We've got to operate in groundfish where there's been no profit for years. We've got to operate in salmon where there's been very little profit for years. And we have to pay the cost of operating year-round. So it's very hard for our people to compete with a company that sets up in a garage or a basement somewhere with a non-union crew, goes out and buys fish, and how do we handle that?
Jack,
George,
so we've gone down.
Remember the point and answer
I'll
after the
remember
break.
that,
You've got to answer after the break. Jerry Spitz just told us that they've lost a lot of their herring work to these garage people who set up in a garage and only operate during the herring season. You'd like to see the back of them, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And the other point he makes, to which George Hewison is going to respond, is that they've got to operate year-round and take the rough with the smooth, the groundfish, the salmon, on which he said he didn't make much money.
Well, I think that's bunk, to use Jerry's expression. If you look at BC Packers' financial statements, the the last 2 years, and the year before last in particular, and last year, they've had record profits, and they've had a record financial sheet. As for the, a big issue that's of real concern to our shore plant workers is the fact that many of the association companies are taking the fish in the back door, in the front door, and they're shipping it out the back door for processing. They're going to these garage operations, and it means that our members don't get the work. And
True or
that's
false?
part of the...
Well,
I'll give you some examples.
It depends on what kind of definition and what kind of small examples George is using. The majority of the fish that's processed through our associations, through our association members, is processed in the big traditional plants and the traditional shore-based operations.
Oceanside Fisheries, which is a Canadian fish company, last year they had 4 days' work. They didn't get enough even to get stamps for unemployment insurance.
That's because there was no fish in the north.
There was lots of fish last year in the north, and there was other plants were working in that same area, but most of the fish was trucked in. Tofino, they shut the plant down last year. At the same time, they're building other plants in other areas. We've got Brian Fraser, who's a member of the Fisheries Association.
What do you want? You want controls over the establishment of all herring plants and no garage operations at all?
We've talked to the provincial government about this, and they issued a whole bunch of fancy reports. And basically, they concluded there's no problem with foreign capital in the BC fishing industry. We say that's nonsense. We're going to Victoria to put our concerns on the line this week.
Yeah, what you want to protect your membership, even if you're not a majority of the fishermen, according to Jerry, is you want total control on the establishment of plants and none of these two-bit backdoor plants, or whatever they are. I don't mean to insult them. These small operations should be allowed to operate as diversions.
And that's right, and whether they're fly-by-nights or whether they're just an attempt by the association to circumvent union organization, we don't really care. They're a disaster for the industry.
Is that bunk?
Okay, it is. It'd be terrific for us if the government or George came along and said, you guys are the only ones licensed to process fish in all of British Columbia. Hell, that'd be just great.
That'd be a monopoly.
That'd be a monopoly.
You'd have Mr. Wapney after you again.
Right. They
so
have
we
a
can't
monopoly,
have that.
Jack.
They have a monopoly.
They have a monopoly.
You're saying they haven't.
They have a monopoly.
Well, obviously the figures
they have a monopoly because
belie that statement.
Go ahead, please.
It all goes to the same
Go
market.
ahead, please.
Yes, I want to speak to both of them. Question for both of them.
Right.
I just made a trip back from the States, and I was talking to a fisherman who delivered his total catch to Griffin in Vancouver, a Canadian buyer, for $1,200 a ton for 8% roe herring. Now, there's a heck of a difference between what's being banded around here.
Does that sound reasonable to you? $1,200 a ton?
No, it sounds like he won't be in business very long if it's true. I can't believe that to be true.
You don't accept that? George, do you?
I think it's possible. It's very possible.
But if somebody had come to you with $1,200 a ton for 8% herring, you'd have signed an agreement.
We'd probably have an operation. Although we've got to be clear, we want to see the whole industry operating at that $1,200 a ton. We think it is possible.
Must take this call from Swantula. I did a broadcast the other week with 3 fisher women from Swantula, and dashed me, but with the Olympics on that day, and they weren't seen in Swantula. Go ahead from Swantula.
Jack, I'm calling it, and I'd like to talk to George. And my question is, I voted on the agreement from Byron, and my vote for non-acceptance of that vote was not because of the price. It was because it was just the 2 companies and not the whole association.
That was why you voted against it.
I voted against.
I think there were probably a lot of people that had that opinion as well. The strategy of the negotiating committee, we know now that there are companies that are prepared to pay more. The feeling was, the information that we had was that if those 2 had signed, there would have been others that also would have broken with the association.
Your people are under better control
and they
than
would
that, aren't they?
They would have gone fishing. They want an operation.
Our people in the Fisheries Association aren't in any control at all. They set the price of $650 based on the market. They didn't set it on the basis of trying to play fancy games with
somebody else were paying $1,000 a ton, it wouldn't make any never mind to you.
That's right, but I can't believe it. The only way they could pay $1,000 a ton is that maybe, and it's a big maybe, they're the only ones dealing.
Webster, Spitz, and Hewison after the break.
They got something that looks, frozen. It's already frozen. No, they got something that looks like a herring up there.
That's on the
very much like our herring.
Geez, they'd love a couple of decent herring.
Yeah, I'd let a herring.
Why don't you go to?
Well, he's asking us, so we're on strike.
They don't
go to the herring sale.
We used to get
NW.
CKNW.
Get a bucket.
We used to get roe
It's good
in
herring.
our country, remember? Herring roe.
That's right. Used to sell it in Britain.
There's a sell a hard roe or the soft roe.
Soft roe. You should see how much money we spent on trying to can and promote
No, we really
milk.
don't use
You know,
the herring. I mean,
soft roe,
this letting it
we
rot
lost our
before we
ass.
pop it, that's ridiculous.
Have you ever eaten a roe?
Soft roe?
You
Or
should
the
be slit
hard
it
roe?
with a knife and take the roe
Kazunoko?
by hand.
Sure, I like it.
Is it good?
Oh, yeah.
Is it what, $50 a pound?
That's
Well,
iffy.
yeah.
That's why it's the only market in the world. No, it's not worth $50
Well,
a pound.
I went to Scotland this year for my holidays, and they eat a lot of herring, but they're on strict quotas now in the North Sea.
Yeah. Good fat Atlantic North Sea herring. Twice the size of yours.
Salmon is a good fish.
The colder the water, the better the herring.
Well, our so-called scrap fish are many of them are much tastier than salmon, and
Oh, I agree entirely. I'd much rather have a herring than a salmon.
herring and potatoes are
5 minutes.
The only kind of salmon I like is canned salmon.
9.
Call from Qualicum.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to ask George Hewison that since their confrontation is with the Fisheries Association and the big companies, if he doesn't think, therefore, that it's a desirable turn of events brought on by the herring season this year for the fishermen to form their own small companies and co-ops and retain ownership of their product and market it direct to Japan, and this would last all through the salmon season as well, because the union is not in the marketing business, and these plants and fishermen are not avoiding unionization, and I'm wondering why the insistence on calling them scabs now.
Well, it first of all goes to the question of recognizing who controls the marketplace. Even if you form cooperatives, and that's been, tried down through the history of this industry, you run up against a very stark reality that about 2 or 3 companies in Japan that, as I say again, are on the scale of General Motors and Marubeni, Mitsubishi, and the Hokkaido Co-op, which works very closely with them, control the marketplace. You'd find yourself up against the very same reality as we do as a trade union in bargaining.
George, really, she put a very good point here. If I'm a fisherman in Vancouver Island, why can't I form, ununionize, my little shore plant and my herring fishery and maybe be a big guy one day? You don't want that. You say, don't try it, the monopolies will kill you.
Our trade union tried that many years ago. We had the United Fishermen's Co-op, and we tried to buck the big guys. And we ran into stark economic reality once you get to that level. We have a lot of history in dealing with co-ops. We have a Central Native Co-op right now that has to market all their production through, by the grace of Marubeni. They're bankrolled by them.
Is that not Central?
And that's right, the Central Native Co-op. They deliver their product to that company.
They may have a good deal with Marubeni.
Well, not at the prices that they're paying right now.
You mean $500 a ton, maybe?
The union basically sets the going rate. Everybody from San Francisco to Alaska is looking at these negotiations and this kind of a settlement to determine where they're going in terms of this year's, how much money they're going to finally take home, whether you're a co-op fisherman, whether you're so-called independent, or whatever you are.
I wish George would admit it, but the market sets a minimum price, not the UFAW, not the Fisheries Association of BC. The only reason that we survive as private companies against the co-ops is because we pay good prices for fish, at least as good as the co-ops. Or why would the co-op members stay in the co-op? They'd or stay with us. They'd go to the co-op. And the second thing is we're efficient, and we have to be, or we go down the tube. So we've got nothing against co-ops. Matter of fact, the co-op's a great thing because it gives a comparison.
Are you fishing, ma'am, just now?
Oh, no. No, I'm not.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. It's a good point. You obviously don't want to let go of the union aspect of it, because he makes the point that there's not really, that these are free enterprise fishermen with a $400,000 boat.
Look, Jack, I've been all across this country. I've talked to fishermen in all parts, and I've seen where they have unions and how depressed the areas are, and I see where the unions are very, very weak and what kind of bargaining strength they have and the living conditions that those fishermen are under. We get requests for assistance. They have lots of co-ops. They have a freshwater marketing board in the Great Lakes. Those fishermen are living in absolute poverty.
Yeah, but you can't say the fishermen, the herring fishermen on the West Coast are living in absolute poverty.
They have co-ops on the East Coast, and they're living in very grim circumstances. The reason, just a minute, the reason why on the West Coast they don't live in poverty is because we've pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps. I can remember in the days of my father when he was fishing, it was a grim thing to be a fisherman. It's a good thing we have a trade union on this coast that is bargaining for fish prices.
Agreed.
Well, I've got no objection to the bargaining for minimum prices for fish, but you got to give a little credit, George. The standard of living for the fishing industry on this coast is the highest in the world. We have the highest paid fishermen, we've got the highest paid shore workers, and the highest paid tendermen.
Because we're organized. That's
We've
why.
also got the highest paid civil servants, the highest paid ferry workers.
Okay.
One of the
reasons for that.
Gentlemen, I've got to adjourn this. Can I move a motion seconded by you and supported by George that this is a $50 million wake on the herring fishery, by and large, for your people in the Fisheries Association and for your people who deal with the big companies is down the tube for this year. Gone.
Regrettably, yes.
Gone.
Gone.
Well, no wonder. Who's going to pay $50 a pound even in Japan for hard roe? Eh? When that comes back, you'll fish again.
That's right.
Well, I think we've got to take a good hard look at the question of the resource itself, Jack.
My thanks very much to Jerry Spitz of the Fisheries Association and George Hewison after the break.
Off you go punting. Punting, do they go now?
They're going straight from makeup to the bargaining table.
Hey, tell her.
Morning,
Larry.
Tell them to bring us some heroin next time they come.
No, you got to go down to the NW sale and get a bucket. It's up to $5 now, isn't it? How much is the bucket? When are you fishing this? I must go and get some. Well, it's the NW Offense Fund sale. You know nothing, Freddie. I used to go down and report on the Offense Fund fish sale.
I thought it was something that just started in the last
No,
little while.
Christ, it's been going for what, 20 years, George? Yeah.
25 seconds exactly, we're out. 25.
What else tomorrow morning?
Hugh Curtis and Atomic Energy Commission.
I think 45 minutes will do it, got this. 50 minutes has got this. You think you're going to be able to arrange?
Roll them up, set of them, do
Oh,
you,
no
Jack?
problem. He's here
Do it,
off
do
the
it on a roll
top.
'em up.
Tomorrow, Linda.
Tomorrow we have Minister of Finance Hugh Curtis.
Oh,
talking-
budget today in Victoria.
Yes.
It's going to be here live in the morning
Yes.
to discuss the details of the budget. Good. Anything else?
We have two representatives from the Atomic Energy Commission of Canada.
Oh, they must be pleased about the provincial government's 7-year ban on exploration and mining. My thanks to Messrs. Hewison and Spitz on the herring. Tomorrow morning, Webster, 9 a.m. precisely.